Hello, my name's Rachel Joyce, and I'm the author of Miss Benson's Beetle, which, when I hold it up like this, looks about the size of an encyclopedia, but is actually a normal-sized hardback book. And it's the story of two women, Marjorie Benson and Enid Pretty, who set out from 1950s Britain in order to travel to the other side of the world in search of a beetle that's not yet been found. When I wrote the novel, when I started out to write this novel originally, I knew I wanted to write about female friendship, and I knew I wanted to write a book where I put women right at the center of the story. But I didn't simply want to write a book about friendship, because I feel there have been so many, brilliant stories about friendship between women. So I decided to send my women on a kind of spectacular adventure. And I wanted it to be the kind of adventure story that you would have expected, a male story to be. So I started off by reading all those things like Rogue Male and 39 Steps, and then Robinson Crusoe. I just went to all the classic male adventure stories. And then I thought, well, I'm going to put my women through all the same stuff. And as I was writing the book, I felt they were really with me. I could feel them in my car, just egging me on to kind of be really bold. So I feel it is a bold book for me, but a kind of joyful one. And that was the energy of the two women. I knew that there were a lot of things that weren't directly in my experience, Beatles being one, New Caledonia being another. And I ended up doing I did a lot of beetle research. I did going to the Natural History Museum. I managed to see even Darwin's collection of beetles, which was an amazing day. But then in terms of the women themselves, I felt I couldn't really let the book go until I absolutely knew what they were wearing, what it felt like to be wearing those clothes in the heat, what they were eating. I just felt if I knew all those things, I could get away with it, because the truth was that I didn't go to New Caledonia, and I knew I couldn't go to New Caledonia. So I think as a writer, you have to make sure that you write with confidence. But actually, I found it a really scattered kind of time. I find it very, very hard to focus on any one thought. I've got a friend who said to me the other day that if she's going upstairs to get something, she has to keep saying to herself, going upstairs to fetch the ... because otherwise by the time she's got upstairs, she can't remember why she's there. And that's how I feel. So even though it should have been the kind of perfect time for me, I found it really unsettling. And I haven't felt that freedom that you need, I think, as a writer, to kind of just go into spaces for a very long time that are imagined and keep being pulled back to the present. It does feel like you're just dropping your book, or kind of at least hurling your book, and not really knowing where it's going to land or how it's going to land has been, again, I found it really unsettling, because you can't help it. I think you love a book when you let it go, you still love it. And I don't mean you think it's brilliant. You love with all its complications. Otherwise you wouldn't, I don't think you could have, you can't write the thing. And then just suddenly to sort of go, right, off you go. I have no idea where, I have no idea how, I have no idea when, I can't see you, is a very, again, it's unsettling. And it wakes me up sometimes, that unsettled feeling. It's just a strange tension, I think, between what is and what isn't. There's something about just being able to, for me, get in the car, possibly the train, but more frequently the car, and drive until I hit the end, that I find really, really liberating. And I know I live in near Stroud, so everywhere I look, there is land. And for a while, I really loved that, land and sky. But maybe it's to do with age. I don't know. I feel it's a kind of visceral connection and need to see sea. And I don't mean pretty sea, I mean proper sea. Now, the section I've chosen actually comes about halfway in the book. Marjorie Benson and Enid Pretty have travelled to the other side of the world to a tiny island called New Caledonia, where they are searching for a beetle that's never been found before. This section is actually their first night out in the open, and it's not as easy for Marjorie, our heroine, as she had hoped. How does a woman get into a hammock when she has not got into a hammock before? Enid asked if she needed help, but Marjorie, still piqued after the business with the tent, and also her confession that she had never been on an expedition before, insisted she could manage. Enid seemed to mount her hammock with no difficulty whatsoever. One moment she was on the ground, the next she was in a hammock. She even had her dog, Mr. Rawlings, with her, his ears glowing in the dark. "Sleep well, Marge." Marjorie's hammock was less amenable. She tried one leg first. It went swinging off with her a little bit on it, but mostly not. She tried taking it by surprise, mounting suddenly. The hammock accepted her weight, then produced a full cartwheel and tossed her out the other side, dumping her in a load of spikes. In the end, she gave a leap and pitched herself. She landed on her front, her mouth mashed against the canvas, rocking violently, but still she had done it. Technically, she was in a hammock, no one could argue with that, though she could barely move without the risk of depositing herself back on the ground. It took a lot of effort to roll herself the right way up. She pulled the mosquito net around her. But sleep? How could she possibly do that? Who in their right mind would even close their eyes? The bungalow was one thing, but at least there had been the pretense of a roof and some walls. This was terrifying. Her senses felt sharpened, like pencils. Her torch was about as much use as a paddle in the ocean. She heard whistles and screams from creatures she'd never even had nightmares about, let alone seen. Rough cawing, lunatic whooping, once a clang. When a pale shadow took shape, she lay taut as a trap, her eyes so wide they could have popped, until it gave a snort and became a pig. More whistling, more twitching. Another animal that screamed as if it was being eaten alive. She thought of Enid, the gun. Then something landed on her face. Possibly it meant no harm. Possibly it mistook her for something friendly, or at least inanimate. But Marjorie did not feel friendly, and neither did she feel inanimate. Her first instinct was to bat it, unwise. It got meshed in her net, flapping and squeaking. A bat. She had batted a bat. And now Marjorie was panicking, and the bat was panicking, and there was something in her mouth, but it was not a bat, it was her net. And even though the bat had flown free, she was swinging wildly, up, down, like an awful ride at the fair, while 100 mosquitoes zoomed in to bite her. The dawn chorus came miles before dawn. It was actually the middle of the night. Nevertheless, every bird in New Caledonia woke early and decided to sing about it. Then the cicadas joined in, lesser chirruping than heavy marching. Gradually, silver light seeped into the dark, and shapes came to life. A banana tree, a rock. The birds went back to sleep. The cicadas settled down. She told herself that if anything was going to eat her, it would surely have started by now, and dared to close her eyes. She managed 30 minutes. Then she woke again. Rain was falling all over her. It had been the most awful night of her life. The gap between making a plan and actually doing it was unbridgeable. Nothing Professor Smith had taught her had prepared her for this. Nothing she'd read had prepared her either. She was covered in insect bites. They had even got inside her ears. She was soaking wet, possibly rotting, and she felt wrung out from the lack of sleep. Worse, her body had seized up. The only way to get out of the hammock would be by extending herself in segments like a foot rule. She had no idea how she would walk another step. Already she knew she was in something she was not made for. She thought of the British wives at the consulate party listing everything they missed from home. Branston pickle, grey drizzle, perfect English grass. They were right. Faced with the rainforest, she felt desolate. Back at home, she had a flat with a bed in it, clean sheets, and a nice bedside lamp. She missed streetlights, windows, curtains, roads with proper names. Rationing was better than this. And even though her aunts had taught her it was wrong to cry, Even though she hadn't done so at her mother's funeral, a million tiny dots seemed to prickle her nose, culminating in a salty rush as tears filled her eyes. She hadn't a clue why she was lying in a hammock on the other side of the world, already half crippled, looking for a beetle that had never yet been found. She could die out here under these alien stars and no one would know. She thought of her father, her mother, her brothers. She thought of the professor, Barbara, and her aunts. And the more she thought about the people she'd lost, the more she wanted them back. Her crying wasn't about missing home anymore. It wasn't about Branston pickle or green grass and roads with proper names. It was something else. It had been with her ever since her father had walked out of his French windows and left her behind. You might travel to the other side of the world, but in the end it made no difference. Whatever devastating unhappiness was inside you would come too. Marjorie lay in her horrible hammock and she sobbed.